that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, narrated by Disney, or current Lucasfilm, whichever way you slice it, Legends. Today I have for you Book 3 within Supernatural Encounters, which again, these are just my thoughts. They're similar to reviews, but I'm just kind of giving my overall thoughts and opinions. I'll give a full review of this book once I've read all 1,055 pages, because it's that long. But this book, particularly, and I mean, obviously, slight spoilers for this book. If you don't want to know anything, then just read it. You can read it for free on StarWarsTimeline.net. What are you doing with your life? Why are you watching this particular video when you should be reading it? But Supernatural Encounters Book 3, Firstborn of the Celestials and the Architects of Madness. There's a sort of creation account at the beginning of this, where we see some of the firstborn, like, you know, beings that aren't, like, supernatural, that are just, like, they live. And some of those are the Killiks, which, you know, is a Troy Denning creation because of, you know, Dark Nest. So, but that gives more importance to them. The Ang-T, which is something important to Dark Nest, Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi, and they're in other RPG material. So, important characters there. The Oswaft, or Oswaft, I don't know how you would say that, but the creatures that Lando meets in, not the Mind Up of Sharu, but the Starkeza Thon Baka. So those guys. The Cathar, which of course are the cat-like species. The Osarians, which are the character, or the race that Lando meets in the second, I guess in all three books of the Lando Calrissian trilogy. The Sharu, the Mun, you know, Darth Plagueis' race, which are recognized as the elder races, at least as far as I'm understanding it. We deal with Wastek from Devil Worlds, which was that sort of like ethereal thing that was being held captive by these weirdos in this pocket dimension, or where the fudge was going on in Devil Worlds. And because the whole thing with Devil Worlds, which I reviewed a long time ago at this point, but Devil Worlds was a sort of acid trip written by Alan Moore, which dealt with a lot of weirder parts to the universe, stuff that was just unexplained for years until this story. And Wastek was just this super being, and Han Solo, Leia, and Sasquatch, you know, frickin' Chewbacca looking like the Bigfoot in that story. The art's horrible. At least for him. He looks awful. But they get transported to this place. There's like these cultists that are like trying to hurt them, but then Chewie releases this thing. It like does horrible things to all of them and lets Han and all of them go free. So we deal with him in this part of the book, and he, it's interesting because Wastek is I don't know if it's him, but it's a lot like the Silmarillion with dwarves. There's this beautiful moment within the Silmarillion, which is basically the Bible to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. But in the Silmarillion, it talks about there is God, like an official God, just like this universe kind of also describes it, as far as Supernatural Encounters is concerned, an actual deity. Though the difference is that the Lord of the Rings God is a lot more basically the Christian God. The God in Star Wars, as far as Joe Bongiorno has shown us, is very more mysterious a little bit, in the sense that there does seem to be some grand plan from the mind of the creator of the universe, or of the entire Star Wars universe, or whatever, but those plans are not very explicit to us. Not even to the Celestials or the Architects or whatever else we talk about in this section. You know, all these supernatural beings don't even really know what God's plan is, right? God does have a plan, that it's clear, but none of us really know what that is. So it's a little bit more vague. And it is also like that with Iluvatar, who's God in Lord of the Rings, but there's a bit more coherence and, I guess, intentionality behind what he does. There's a clear... It's very much like the biblical God in that sense in the Silmarillion. But I mention this because, of course, you have Malkor, who's basically the devil. They have this world song that they're trying to make this grand orchestra in the cosmos, and Malkor's like, but I want to do my own thing. You know, and this causes disruption. The same thing with Satan being like, I don't want to follow you, you know. But we jump down to, you know, these other minor gods that Iluvatar basically makes. And I'm counting Waztek as that sort of like thing. Not exactly, but there are parallels to this. And he wants to create things on his own. And in the Silmarillion story, there's, you know, this I guess, demigod that, you know, just wants to create things just like his father did. It wasn't like Melkor, whose means were to be, you know, I want to be better, I want to make my own thing. It's just, I look up to my father and I want to do something like my father, you know? So he ends up making the dwarves, but he's not God, so he does it incorrectly. And it doesn't go exactly as planned. But God says, I will let it, Iluvatar says, I will let it exist. And so that's how the dwarves were created. But I mean, of course, Iluvatar knew that would happen. But anyway, but the point being, Waztek makes the Architects, which are the things we see in the Devil Worlds comic, which are Titlani, what's his name, Koldanda, Sin, I forget the other names, but these are the 4 beings we see in the Devil Worlds comic book, where Leia is getting chased by these Imperials, and then these supernatural beings in the sky send one of the stormtroopers to like 10,000 years in the past or something like that. So Leia, you know, goes to leave the planet and she sees like this ancient stormtrooper helmet. But like he was just there, he just got teleported to the past by these greater beings. So I mean, those who want to scoff at, you know, the idea of time travel and Star Wars, you know, I mean, yeah, there's a canon thing with the world between worlds, but like this existed, the 80s Droids comic existed, though this book seems to imply that that is not what actually happened, and that the droids are just stupid. And then, you know, we have the stuff with Crosscurrent and Riptide, so there's definitely, you know, a thing for it, just usually more supernatural means that make it happen. One of the fun things about this book, again, I'm just kind of spitballing things that were of particular interest to me. There's a lot discussed in this section. But the Bedlam spirits, the spirits from Devil Worlds, they created the Disney universe by accident. Now, it's a universe that's supposedly not accessible to the average mortal. So it's not like, if the EU ever gets continued, we can have Luke Skywalker of the Legends timeline get transferred over to the Disney timeline and meet that Luke. Like, that's not going to happen. It's not supposed to be possible, at least as far as I understand the stories put this out. It's just that the Bedlam spirits also wanted to create their own thing. And so with their meddling, because they're basically like children just born who don't fully understand what they're doing, and they create this alternative universe, and they're like, well, maybe we should nuke it. But at the same time, the Celestials are like, no, you can let it be, because while it's a pale imitation of the old, you know, the innocent beings within this universe, in this, you know, alternate take, you know, did not necessarily choose to be born, right? They didn't choose to be in a wrong alternative timeline, so we will still make sure that everything flows and works within that universe. And so we're not going to nuke all these innocent beings because of your mistake. So, you know, it is a hard diss on Disney canon, while also being like, yeah, but we're going to nurture it and try to make it the best it can be, because, you know, So it's not saying though that it's like in the same universe. It's literally a different universe that a god accidentally created, which in a sense is true. George Lucas is the god of Star Wars, of the films, and he, allowed demigods to work on the EU, right? Because that was canon, but it wasn't something that the creator himself worked on. It was demigods, people that had authority but were riding in somebody else's universe. Right, so when Disney bought the rights, they essentially became this new god, and they created another universe. So I think it's fine, and it doesn't bug me too much. I don't mind it. I mean, if you're ever going to get the EU continue with Lucasfilm, you're going to need them to, not, because right now I think the mindset with Lucasfilm is that they're clashing. We can't talk about Legends. We can't continue Legends because we're trying to do our thing. And these people keep trying to complain and say their stuff is better. But if they have the mindset that no, it's all one, in the sense that like, no, we own all this. And like, all this is connected. All this is in a roundabout way, It leaves open more of a possibility of them being willing to accept new stories as opposed to feeling antagonistic against it as if the EU is going to hurt them. When all it's going to really do is bring them more clout with fans, There's no need to fight. There's no need to say that Disney sucks or the EU sucks or this or that. Da-da-da-da. We could live in a world where everybody can be happy and enjoy their own thing. Like, I don't really watch canon. Ahsoka's literally coming out at the time of this recording. It's a big thing for Star Wars. I'm not watching it. I don't care. People are asking me about it. I don't know anything. I just know Ahsoka's in it. And other Rebels characters. That's all I know. The guy with the lightsaber looks cool because he's got a beard, and I dig old people with beards. It makes me think that they're cool. I'm sure he is cool. I'm not going to watch it, though. But for those who are, like, dual canon fans and stuff, those who like both, like some of my friends, like, that make YouTube videos, there's a guy named Daniel on YouTube. He makes both dual canon stuff. Frickin' Stevie B, he watches both. I don't know where two Star Wars nerds are with that, because last time I checked, they weren't going to watch Disney canon anymore, but, they used to, So there's people I'm friends with that watch and read both, This is a way to be like, oh, it actually, like, whoa, I don't know. I get why people be annoyed with it, but honestly, I like it. It's a good way of explaining why Disney canon even exists. It's a good way of trying to make a pitch to Lucasfilm about, look, this doesn't have to be an enemy versus, this doesn't have to be a versus thing. This can just be one thing. You could still make stories in new canon. You could still make stories in Legends. You don't have to feel antagonistic about it. And I understand the intent, and I think it works well. And it is a little funny disc there was saying that they made a pale imitation of the old, Like, it's fun. Sorry, I stayed on that too long. Alien Exodus is my next comment because we deal a lot with the origins of humans and near-human species because there's a million of them in the Star Wars universe and how that all came about. There's a lot of genealogies and stuff like that, like the Bible, and talking about a bunch of different sectors because it really goes into detail about like, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. Where did they all come from? Because clearly they must all have some sort of ancestry connection because even if they're not human, they all look very, like, there's like, you can name off, like, 5 species that, like, are basically human, except for a few key differences, like the Arconians, or the Chiss. I mean, they literally are just blue with red eyes. Outside of that, they have basically human anatomy. So, like, what is up with all of this stuff, and why is it all like that? So, that was cool. We also get the origins of humans on Coruscant. Because the humans that are settling, again, it's like the Bible. The Bible isn't, I mean, it's a linear narrative, but it's also glossing over a lot because it's not trying to be a story in the sense, like, you can say it's fiction all you want. I don't care. I'm not here to have that debate. But it's not written to be like a story. It's written to read kind of like a historical piece. Because it glosses over a lot of the details and kind of just gives you the broad strokes, like Exodus with Moses and everything tells you he grew up as royalty and then he just bailed because he killed a He killed a guy and ran into the woods, and then he met God, right? Like there's a lot of stuff you could develop there, but they don't, because that's not the point. It's giving you the gist of the story. Or if you want a more dramatized, not as accurate version of those events, you can watch The Prince of Egypt by DreamWorks. Phenomenal film. Not exactly accurate, but historically so. But it's more emotional, more story driven. You know what I mean? So like that, you know, time passes with the humans. We don't get to see every waking development with them. But they eventually find some old infinity gates, you know, that the Qua and other things made, so that they end up being able to jump to Coruscant, which I know is controlled by the Tong, which I believe the war that the humans have later on is delved into in the Guide to Warfare. But I haven't actually read that yet. But I'm pretty sure the Tong are also related to the Mandalorians, so that's also like a whole thing. But before tensions with the Tong really begin, Titlani, who, see, at this point too, she wants to play God. And Titlani is interesting because we get so much character development for her in these stories. They don't exactly know what they are, which is really interesting. Because Watstek made them, right? And Watstek isn't even God, but she wants to be that. She wants to be in control of everything. Doesn't want to be a bully like a Sith or anything, but she wants to be in control. She's trying to keep her siblings in check to also help her do that. But she calls herself Onre and says that I'm your goddess, you should follow me and worship me. You know, it's like the God who created everything, much like the God that I believe exists now, you know, you don't see God talking to you every second of the day. You don't see him on the news on the White House saying, I am real, believe in me. You don't see that, you know, him talking in the sky, be like, I am real, believe in me, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The God that I believe in has left, I believe, sufficient evidence of his existence, and it's up to you to decide whether or not that's good enough for you. You know, belief beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm not trying to get into that, right? I'm just saying, like, in the same sense, the God who created Star Wars isn't really trying to prove himself to anyone. He's not trying to prove that he created. He's kind of in the background, and we haven't really heard from him since he created everything and made the Celestials. He's kind of just backed off. We just haven't heard from him since. But Tidlani, unlike actual God, wants to be a god. So she's making her presence known. She's letting people know. She's being boastful, you know? Which to me is not something a god would do. This is stuff that man-made gods do. This is what... I mean, yeah, we have the Bible and stuff where God announces himself, but those are specific times. Right? Because Titlani's idea is forever. But, you know, same thing with the Greek gods, there's the Roman gods, the Pantheon, you know. It's just interesting because she isn't... I mean, she has godlike power, for sure, but she's not a god in the sense that she's not the end-all, be-all. She was created by someone else that's even more powerful than her. But she wants that deity status. She wants that worship. But she also doesn't even like her worshippers. She doesn't love them. She just wants them to follow her because she knows best. And I think it's really interesting. But tensions with the Tong arise. And what's cool to see, too, is that I know that the story's kind of talked about elsewhere, but you kind of get the more spiritual aspect of the same thing because, you know, the Celestials are still around. And they're saying, like, don't fight Tong. You have immortality right now. If you go and fight these humans, you will lose it. Because the humans keep taking up more of the planet, making more cityscapes, ruining what the planet originally was. Right? By the time we get to episode 1, it's an entire city, right? But it wasn't always like that. And, you know, the Tong are sick of it. And they make blood sacrifices to the architects, right? So it's like the Celestials and architects know one another, but they're not really fighting against one another. They're just trying to influence the people within. So you get the spiritual conflict going on behind on top of everything else, which is kind of interesting. I also just think it's interesting that the Tong deciding that they must fight humans made them lose their immortality. Uh, yeah, that's pretty much it. And then, you know, the Tong eventually have to bail um, from Coruscant. It's not called Coruscant this time, but they have to bail, and they, you know, they go to another planet or moon or whatever they do. I kind of forget. There's a lot of information in my head right now, and you know they promise to never be vulnerable again. And unless I'm retarded, I'm fairly certain this is related to, you know, the Mandalorians, because at the end of Tales of the Jedi, the Mandalorian guy or whatever falls down or something like that. Or no, in the, which one is it? But there's a Tong that you see, and they're one of the original. So um, we'll also deal with Euthros, which was a section of the book that we just focused on for a while, which was a bit interesting. Um, Kaldan Sin, however the fudge you say his name, he also wanted to create things, right? Like Titlani was, and like his father had. But he doesn't exactly make very nice things. Um, he ends up making the Sissy Rook, the Yanchuri, the Jebi, um, and I just mentioned those because I think it's really funny. Um, he also made shapeshifter races to be spies for Titlani, because Titlani asked for spies so she can, you know, make sure she's being able to watching over all the galaxy places that they're in charge of. So he makes a bunch of shapeshifter races, including the Shidu. I was expecting the Claudites to be mentioned. They weren't. So I don't know if they'll be addressed later, but that was interesting. We also get to a few mentions of the dragons of old that used to exist. And Typho Gem is created. Typho Gem is the kind of Cthulhu-looking guy that's in that one comic with Vader, where he's playing chess against an octopus, and stuff. It's weird, but yeah, he's a thing now. Also, Gorog gets made, which is from. Oh, so sorry. I forgot to mention. So Titlani goes to Sin and is like, I want to make a powerful child. So I need you, my brother, to have. I mean, she doesn't say sex, but she's like, I need you to basically breed with me. And here are some of the things that are made off of their pairing, because they do this more than once. They make the Gorog, which I don't know if it's in any other material, because I'm not as well versed as Brennan is. Quinlan Voss on YouTube, you should definitely go subscribe to. But the Gorog is something you fight in The Force Unleashed. So that was interesting. And Titlani and Sin make the Mongol, which is this weird ooze thing that's ancient and old. And it's brought up a few places in the EU. It is speculated within EU sources. You can't blame this on supernatural encounters. It is speculated that the things that was being worked on in Death Troopers and Red Harvest, all that stuff originally, from eons past, originates with the Mongol. So there's no confirmation of that necessarily, though. But the Mongol is probably one of the most terrifying things within all of Star Wars before this book came out. Because the Mongol are a lot like the Flood from Halo. They're a very disturbing thing. Luckily, there are good ways to kind of stop them or starve them. But they are a very eldritch horror of a species who usually hang out in other space in the unknown regions, so you don't have to worry about it too much. But they could be a massive threat if somebody decided to write them to be. But they're worse than the Flood because they're very sadistic, whereas the Flood kind of just do what they are naturally have to do. Also, Waru, unless I read incorrectly, is the grandchild of the architects, which I think is amazing. We also have a section that deals with the origins of Sith alchemy. And then after all of that, the last section we have before the book ends, we have this whole flashback section with Arhul, where he's 16 years old, and this is so good. It's actually probably some of my favorite parts of this book, because a lot of this book is like the Silmarillion, where you're getting overall data and facts and an overview of events without going super in detail, because it leaves the room for if the EU ever gets continued and somebody's really inspired by this book, they can make a full-on novel about that particular topic. But this is more broad, right? It gives you point A to point B, but what was the stuff in between? How do you flesh that out? Well, somebody else can if they choose to. Like the Cosmic Wars gets mentioned a bunch. That could be explored someday. I don't necessarily know how, because it's more like, not biblical, but it's like grander. You know, sometimes it's better to just leave that mysterious, but also it could be really interesting to explore. But it deals with Arhul at home. His father tells him, I need you to take out these weeds. I need you to root them out. So he spends all this time, day in and day out. His sister says, why don't you come to the club with me downtown or whatever, you know? We'll go have some fun. And he's like, no, I should probably finish my work. You know, but he gets more frustrated because the job, it's hard. It just won't stop. And one day he gets so frustrated, he just starts tearing them out. And he has stopped it for the immediate future. Like, for the next few months, maybe even the rest of the year, the weeds won't be an issue. But there's a deep-rooted... the weeds come from, like, in the middle of the location they live in. So they either have to get rid of all of their plants and vegetables and stuff, and the housing where they live, and just massively dig underneath there to clear it out, or they're just going to have to deal with it every year. And this whole thing was kind of a lesson that his father tried to show him, that, like, you know, I will support you whatever you try to do. But, you know, whether you become, you know, like a journalist or whatever you choose to do, I just want you to be careful, because with journalism, you're going to see a lot of evil. And it's not your job to fix all of it. You can weed out some. But some evils are kind of, they don't just go away. They're more deeper rooted than that. They're not easy to quell. But, you know, you do the best you can. And I'm not doing this justice, but that whole section was so well written. It is amazing how a book that's not really about Arhul and more about the things that he's discovered, with the few sections that Joe Bongiorno has chosen to focus on this character, I have grown to care about this character far more than many other characters in Star Wars EU books that I've read in the span of, like, novels. Like, Fatal Alliance, barely remember any of those characters. Bounty Hunter Wars, everybody outside of Boba. You know, like the villains. The chick that he was hanging out with, that, like, the whole mystery. I can't remember a single thing about her. Why? Because the book didn't write her that well. But Arhul, Hextrafon, in this short span of time, I've grown to really like him. And that whole section, I just really, really enjoyed. That interlude was really nice. We also jump ahead to when he did actually become a journalist. We find out that Han Solo rescued him from Zygarian slavers once. And so that was a big deal for his family. Arhul's family also gets murdered by those same Zygarians later on. All of them. And he would later go on to join the rebellion. And then he has this great conversation with Mon Mothma as well, who also is from Trangilla, the same as Arhul is. And that was great. Like I said, it was a great way to end the section of the book, and I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, I'm enjoying all the big concept things that we're learning within this book, but these smaller moments, these character moments with Arhul, may be some of my favorite. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for this section. A lot of Eldritch horrors were made in this section. The architects explaining, you know, the beings from those Devil Worlds comics were introduced. We learned a lot of things in this section, and I'm excited to see where we go forward. But anyway, until next time, guys, I'll let you know my thoughts when I get finished with Book 4 in Supernatural Encounters. Until then.